Hello, I'm Robbie Mochrie, and today I'm going to talk about part 4 of my textbook, Intermediate Microeconomics, which looks at how firms can generate economic profits. This means that we're going to drop the assumption of perfect competition, which we used throughout part 3. We're going to keep everything else from part 3 though, so that firms will have perfect information about markets and they're going to use their resources efficiently. You should know that in part 3 there are 2 sections. Chapters 10, 11 and 12 were all about production and costs, while chapters 13 and 14 were about how firms would behave if they faced a perfectly competitive market. That first section of part 3 is very general. I'm not going to repeat any of the arguments, but they will all hold in part 4. For example, we will assume that all firms have a production function from which it is possible for us to derive a total cost function and then average and marginal cost functions. In chapter 13, we showed that a firm maximises its profits where the marginal revenue is equal to the marginal cost. That is also a general result, and we will use it in part 4. But because we assumed in part 3 that the firm faces a perfectly competitive market, we found that the demand curve was a horizontal line. That meant that the firm's marginal revenue was equal to the market price. And so the firm maximised its profits when its marginal cost was equal to the market price. In part 4, we think about what will happen when the demand curve is downward sloping. We consider 2 particular situations. In the first one, the firm has a monopoly. It is the only firm in the market. Indeed, it's the only firm which can enter the market. So, in some ways, monopoly is the exact opposite of perfect competition. Instead of firms being free to enter and exit, there is only one firm, and no other firm can enter. In the second situation we look at, there will be a duopoly. So there will be 2 firms in the market, but no firm can enter or exit. This is some way between monopoly and perfect competition. Now, remember that the demand curve is also the average revenue curve for the firm. So here we see the implications of it sloping downwards. The marginal revenue curve must always lie below the average revenue curve. And in the diagram, I've shown the special case where the average revenue curve is a line. The marginal revenue curve is then also a line. And both lines start at the same point on the vertical axis. But the marginal revenue curve is exactly twice as steep as the average revenue curve. I can now add in an average cost curve and a marginal cost curve. You will see that I've given these exactly the same shape as when we were considering the firm in perfect competition. Both of them are U-shaped, indicating that there will be eventually diminishing marginal returns to scale. And you will also see that the marginal cost curve cuts through the average cost curve at its minimum point. Now let's see what happens when the firm chooses its output so that marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. This is the output where the firm maximises its profit. Now we can see that marginal revenue is less than average revenue, or marginal revenue is less than the market price. Marginal cost is also less than the average cost, but the average cost is less than the average revenue. So that difference between market price and average cost is the profit which the firm is able to make on every unit sold. The monopoly makes positive economic profits, as shown in the shaded rectangle. When a firm faces perfect competition, it chooses its output so that the marginal cost equals the market price. A monopoly is behaving differently. It chooses its output so that the marginal cost is less than the market price. Now, we can think of the market price as being a measure of consumers' marginal willingness to pay for the good. The marginal cost is a measure of the firm's marginal willingness to accept offers for the good. Using arguments which I introduced in part 1, it follows that if the marginal cost is equal to the market price, then the market generates as much economic surplus as possible. And so in this slide, I have shown the output where marginal cost equals the market price as the welfare maximising output. You'll see that the welfare maximising output is greater than the firm's profit maximising output. And I've shown this shaded area between the average revenue curve and the marginal cost curve as representing a welfare loss, the cost to society of the monopoly choosing its output to maximise its profits. Now, suppose that people were so outraged by the monopoly's behaviour that they forced it to produce at the welfare maximising output. The market will then generate the larger economic surplus. But you will see in the diagram that as output increases, marginal revenue will be less than marginal cost. We can be certain that the firm makes less profit. The area of the rectangle is here smaller than when the firm is maximising its profit. In chapters 17 to 19, we're going to analyse some of the challenges of duopoly behaviour. In some ways, this is much more complex than what we do with either perfect competition or monopoly. There are many possible market structures, and there are many ways of analysing them. In perfect competition, we of course see many firms in the market and many other firms which might enter the market if there is an opportunity to make profits. There are no costs of entry and exit. In monopoly, with the firm consisting of a single firm, it doesn't have to worry about other firms entering the market. In a duopoly though, there is clearly going to be some competition between the firms, but there is no possibility of entry of other firms. It is possible that the firms will behave as if the market is perfectly competitive. But I'm going to outline a situation where they behave as if they have a restricted monopoly. With the two firms competing in the market, we should distinguish between firm demand and the market demand. In this diagram, I'm doing this by assuming that one of the firms has already chosen its output. The second firm still has to choose its output. The demand curve for this second firm's output can be calculated by subtracting the competitor's output from the market demand. So the firm's demand curve is the market demand curve shifted left by the total amount of its competitor's output. The marginal revenue curve for the firm will meet the demand curve on the vertical axis, but it will be twice as steep as it. Now, keeping the example as simple as possible, I have drawn in a horizontal line, which is both the average cost curve and the marginal cost curve. As before, the firm will maximise its profits where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. Once again, marginal revenue is less than average revenue, so marginal cost and average cost are less than the market price when the firm maximises its profits. Here, we're seeing a situation where the firm makes positive economic profits. Once we have reduced the market demand by the competitor's output, the firm has a monopoly on what's left of the market. Now, why should one firm decide how much it will produce before setting its own output? What would happen if both firms choose their output at the same time? In this case, the firm's decisions are strategically interdependent. The profit that one firm makes depends on the output that the other firm chooses. In the diagram, I'm showing what would happen in the steeper line, what would happen as firm A's profits maximising output changes with firm B changing its output. The flatter line shows how firm B's profit maximising output will change as firm A changes its output. So where these firms meet, both firms are maximising their profits given their competitor's output. Neither firm will want to change their output. This is clearly much more complex than simply thinking about the problem of monopoly. What I'm doing here is to introduce you to some ideas which come from the area of analysis called game theory, and we're going to concentrate on those in chapters 18 and 19 of part 4.